Okay, and we're live. Welcome to everybody here today at Betting on Sports Europe. The panel we've got today is assessing the impact of the tennis review of integrity. My name's Andy McCarron. I'm the SBC's Managing Director. And I have a very illustrious panel with me today. If you could, gentlemen, if you could introduce yourselves and give a brief bit of background of your company and what you do there. David, if you could go first.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So David Lampitt from Sportradar. I'm Managing Director of Sports Content and Partnerships. So look after our company's relationships with 200 or so sports partners around the world across many different sports. But tennis is obviously one of our key sports where we have a long-standing relationship with the ITF, with the International Tennis Federation, as well as with Tennis Australia and the Aussie Open. So yeah, keen interest in all things tennis. I'm a big tennis fan, and obviously we do quite a bit of work on the integrity side of sport as well. So.
Cool. Jonny, could you give us a brief update from you?
Yeah, hi, Andy. Thanks very much. My name is Jonny Gray. I'm the first Chief Executive of the Tennis Integrity Unit, which is going through a process of change we'll get onto on this panel. I've been in the role for about 8 months. Before that, I was in a consulting company running their sports division. So very pleased to be with you today.
Excellent. And Giancarlo?
Hi, my name is Giancarlo Sergi. I'm the General Secretary of the Global Lottery Monitoring System, GLMS. GLMS is a sport integrity body for the lottery sector worldwide. And we are a non-profit organization, and we work with a full range of members, collecting members to start with, the World Lottery, the ULA, European Lottery, DL, and also with individual members, national lotteries. And very recently, we changed, or we amended our statutes. We are now in the position to welcome new category of members, which are the regulators and the public authorities. We offer a full range of services to our community, to our members, like the monitoring alerting system, also the education, prevention, and information network. And on a more personal note, on top of my daily job with GLMS and my free time, I am very active in sport politics on national, international level. I'm the president of the Basketball Federation and board member of FIBA Europe as well. So I'm very interested in what tennis sector has been doing over the last five years or so. Very impressed as well. And I'm also very sensitive when it comes to match fixing, as I'm very close to athletes myself at clubs and leagues and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Cool. Well, I'm sure sport politics will definitely come up during the conversation at some point.
For sure.
The reason for this panel, the independent review into tennis integrity published its report at the end of 2018 after a fair bit of research, and it had big repercussions for certainly the lower echelons of the game, and also the policing of the integrity matters. But I mean, what has happened in that time? It's been just over a year and a half, and things are moving in a very fast at the moment. A lot of the recommendations related to beefing up of the tennis integrity unit, Jonny, and that's kind of one of the reasons why you've come in as the first chief executive. I mean, what's been your brief since you've arrived, and what have you managed to achieve? Jonny, can you hear us? Okay, we've unfortunately we've lost Jonny a bit there.
Looks like Jonny may have frozen.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll pull Jonny back on in a minute. But from a Sportradar perspective, David, I mean, obviously there was some implications with regards to the provision of data in the report, in the review, and certainly the restriction of data. I mean, how has Sportradar adapted to the review?
Yeah, so as you say, I think one of the number of recommendations that the IRP made was that the lowest level of professional tennis 15K tournaments within the ITF World Tennis Tour should be effectively removed from betting coverage, and that's a position that we disagreed with, quite strongly through the course of the process. The review process took a couple of years, in fact, and we kind of made our views known throughout that process that actually a prohibition approach to the supply of data at that level was not the most effective. Not the most effective route to safeguard the integrity of the sport at that level. Having said that, the review made its findings, and we've worked closely with the ITF to support the implementation of those findings. I think the reality of that is that, if you're talking about removing a significant number of tournaments and a significant part of the tennis infrastructure from betting coverage, and also, by the way, from kind of commercial, the commercial value that comes with that, it's not something that you can do at the flick of a switch. And so we've been working with the ITF, in close cooperation with Jonny and the TRU as well, to go through a transition process, basically to transition to a position where the 15K tournaments are gradually removed from coverage over a period of time. I think the impact of COVID this year is going to be interesting, because in many ways I think it's highlighted some of the risks that we highlighted at the time in the review of removing coverage on lower level tennis. Or having it removed completely. It's been a kind of petri dish, really, for kind of seeing the impact on how that can play out in the real world, and I think it will probably have a further kind of effect on the transition. I.e., the transition will take longer simply because of the needs of tennis and the needs of the management of a balanced calendar in order to ensure that the betting markets can be managed appropriately at the same time.
Interesting. Jonny, are you online?
Yeah, sorry, I dropped off. My internet connection's got a problem, but I'm here on the phone.
That's no problem. I hope you got my big build up to your question.
Sorry.
It was basically I was just talking about how the recommendations wanted a beefing up of the tennis integrity unit, and something is one of the reasons why you've come in as the first chief executive. We just wanted to get a bit of a feel for kind of what your remit was, and what you've managed to achieve in the first 8 months or so.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So again, apologies for having dropped off. It's probably helpful for your audience just to very briefly remind you how we got to where we are now and what we're doing going forward. So. The origins of all this is that tennis commissioned an independent review of integrity in the sport back in early 2016. That was a very comprehensive and detailed review with far-reaching implications for the sport. It took nearly 2 years in its deliberations, and it in turn published its findings at the end of 2018. All in all, there were over 260 detailed recommendations within the report, and you can sort of put these recommendations into a number of different buckets. One bucket was about the governance of integrity risk in tennis, and that recommended a whole range of measures, including setting up of an independent supervisory board, the establishment of an independent agency at arm's length to the sport to administer the anti-corruption programs for the sport, and a chief executive for that agency, and a whole range of other governance measures. And you're right, my appointment was part of that. We're in the process of implementing all of those now, and as part of that, we will become the Independent Tennis Integrity Agency in January. And we'll be the first global sport to adopt this form of governance. I don't think will be the last, but I can come back to that later. And then there are a range of other measures. I just caught David talking about some of the measures about protecting the sport and structural issues in the sport. There are a range of measures around the corruption plan, program, and new recommendations on that, and a whole host of other things, including the integration of the tennis anti-doping program into my area of responsibility. So a very brief overview. It's a large and complex area, and we're well on the path of implementation now. I'm happy to talk more about that in the next half an hour or so.
Excellent. I mean, Giancarlo, obviously one of GLMS's remits is to work with sports. I mean, how much of a benefit, how easy does the Tennis Integrity Unit make that for from the operator side of you when dealing with the sport when there are some integrity issues?
Well, basically, tennis is one of the top 3 sports in terms of popularity, as you know, and unfortunately, in terms of suspicious betting pattern as well. So, football being the most suspicious sport into bracket, but with tennis, basketball, and football, we are really working closely with our partner, including with the TIU. So basically, with tennis, is a bit more complicated than basically football. First of all, corrupting one single, I would say, person is more easier, I would say, than corrupting a few players. And when it comes to the fixers, could also tend to manipulate not only the game or the win, but one set or two sets, as you know. So for us, it's a bit complicated, or a bit more complicated, but fortunately we work with a big network of members on a local approach. So we work globally, and we have the local knowledge of our members on the local, I would say, in the country. And on the other side, we work very closely with TIU, changing information with them on the almost weekly basis now. And together we form a very good team. I think it has been a tremendous cooperation with them, and I would like to continue.
I mean, with regards to, can other sports follow the same kind of format that tennis has adopted?
Yes, for GLMS, we treat I would say our partners the same way. We work with FIFA when it comes, or UEFA when it comes to football, with TIU as well. So we exchange information, we work together. So, but most importantly, we also work with law enforcement agency. We work with our partner locally with this local approach, and there is no there's no difference, I would say, in the treatment of our members. Yes.
Excellent. So, I mean, with regards to the TIU, Jonny, can you tell us what I find interesting with the sport of tennis? It's kind of got the opposite challenge with it being the big international sport. Compared to other sports, which tend to be quite regionalised. So what you had in the past is lots of industry companies from different countries feeding into one local sport. But what you've got is the international side of things. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about how you're looking to become the ITIA.
Yeah, so the ITIA, International Tennis Integrity Agency, which we're establishing, I mean, we have an advantage in some ways in tennis because we have a remit for all professional tennis worldwide at all levels of the professional game, from the Grand Slams right down the pyramid to the entry levels of the ITF Tour. And that does give us an advantage in the sense that, we are the single agency with responsibility for that. It requires investment in scale because it's such a wide remit. other sports, as you say, football, I mean, clearly, you know, the pyramid, people have different responsibilities at different levels of the pyramid. So they are a little bit more disjointed. But I know that they are looking very carefully at what we're doing, and you know, President Infantino recently talked about it at a UNODC conference about, you know, the possibility of a global sort of agency for integrity in football. So people are watching what tennis is doing, and they're interested in it, and we're pleased to be, you know, setting the pace, if you like.
Yeah, and I think if I can just come in on that, Andrew, I think a couple of points. I mean, so I agree with Jonny. I think there is, there's an increasing view in terms of, addressing integrity issues on a global level, because integrity issues, and in particular, integrity issues around match fixing, you know, don't respect any sort of national boundaries. And that's one of the particular challenges for sports organizations, and has been historically. I think, you know, you can have a match that takes place in one continent with corrupt actors in another continent, with betting that takes place in a third continent, you know, and trying to police that and bring all of that together is a real challenge. And you know, of course, you know, from a Sportradar perspective, we've worked very closely with FIFA. We've been kind of FIFA's main integrity partner, in fact, for a number of years now, supporting that kind of supporting the work that they are doing on that more global level. I think interesting in terms of the international approach in tennis, because, you know, bringing a bit of COVID context to that, I think actually the strengths and advantages that Jonny talked about in terms of the international setup within tennis, it was one of the things that made tennis, particularly through the crisis, because there isn't a regionalized approach. You've got players coming from all parts of the world into different tournaments that, you know, move around, and the tour moves around. It is super international. It's one of the great attractions of the product. But actually, in the restrictions that everyone has been working under, you know, over the last 6 months, it has made it, I would say, doubly challenging for tennis from an organizational and commercial perspective to actually keep the show on the road. So it is, you know, it's interesting that, you know, these things that we often see, or we've historically seen in normal times as advantageous to the value and the governance of the sport, you know, have actually in some cases been turned on their head, you know, through our experience in 2020.
Giancarlo, I mean, obviously you're the global lottery monitoring system. How do you sort of approach the fact that it's an international approach to this?
Well, same way as David and Jonny explained, it's a global phenomenon. We cannot treat, this big problem in sport, by country. So we need networks. We need a good cooperation worldwide. You mentioned FIFA. I know that UEFA is thinking of creating as well their own association. I know that other federations like Taekwondo, athletics, they went through the same process here. I think the more we cooperate, the better. This process, as we do again with our approach, is really trying to involve any one of our members and getting maximum information from them. This exchange of information is key, but we could not do that without the local knowledge of our members, who are the one offer sport betting on the national level. And of course, in this triangle between us, our members, and our partners like the Tennis Integrity Unit is really, really key. And the more we are, there's no competition here. The more we are, the better.
Excellent. Well, all working together, that's what we want to hear. I mean, with regards to sort of the collaboration, I mean, have we reached a plateau a bit with how we've been working together? Is there any way of sort of leveling up, to use a phrase from a different person? David, is there any changes you think would be useful?
So I think, again, going back to, I guess, the starting point here, which was the IRP report from 2018, I think one of the things that, one of the recommendations coming out of that report was that there should be closer collaboration between the sports and the stakeholders within the sport from an integrity perspective. Those stakeholders obviously being, on the one hand, the sports governing bodies themselves, the sports organisers. On the other hand, Jonny's the organisation that Jonny is head of from a tennis perspective, the TIU, or the soon to be ITIA. Then companies such as ourselves, so those occupying the data distribution layer, collection distribution layer, and then of course, I guess at the end of that chain, the bookmakers themselves. And I think that interface and that collaboration is incredibly important. I think it's often underestimated. I think it's also often, somewhat mistakenly seen that there are different objectives for the organisations in that chain. Actually, of course, the different stakeholders come with slightly different contexts, but generally speaking, the bookmakers, the data distributors, and the sport, and the integrity operators within the sport all want the same thing, which is a clean sport. It doesn't do any participant in that value chain any benefit for there not to be a clean sport. And actually, I think, one thing is that often gets forgotten. And as I said, I think there is still opportunity for for improvements to be made, not just in tennis, but in all sports, in tightening that collaboration. And I know it's something that Jonny feels strongly about. I commend him, because actually there have been significant I think positive steps taken in that direction. And certainly from Sportradar's perspective, it's something that we absolutely kind of advocate for and are willing to participate in. And as Jonny knows, we've been part of a number of working groups over the last 2 years, in fact, to push towards the kind of the effective implementation of the recommendations that came out in 2018.
I'm assuming you agree with all that, Jonny. Is there any areas that you're particularly focused on beefing up since you've arrived? Oh, just hold on a second, Jonny. You are on mute. Okay, go.
Hey, sorry. First of all, I absolutely agree with that, and GLMS and Sportradar are fantastic partners for us, as indeed are organisations like the International Betting Integrity Agency, the other data companies, and of course we enjoy the full support of the governing bodies of tennis. So we are very much aligned, from the sport itself all the way through to the regulated betting companies in keeping the sport clean. As David said, we all have an interest in this. Without integrity, there isn't a sport, there isn't a product for you, the betting industry, to offer that would have the faith of your clients that they are engaging in something which is honest. So our intentions are aligned here, and I think certainly since I've come on board, I've sought to, as David mentioned, take forward the recommendations in the IRP with this respect. I think David talked earlier on about COVID, and there's no doubt that COVID has sort of, if you like, in some respects, put us into a bit of a hiatus for a period, just because of the practicalities of all working remotely. It slowed things down a bit, and certainly for us, our focus got shifted a bit during the lockdown to protecting the sport, the reputation of the sport, and players in particular who were under potentially a lot of pressure in some of these unregulated tennis tournaments and so on. So lots to do here, but absolutely aligned with our partners. So in that respect, I do hear from people say, oh, well, we have different aims and objectives here, and that's not my experience.
So, so what I'm hearing is certainly at this level, everything's working. I hesitate to use the word optimum, but it's a really good, healthy level. So to eradicate some of the if you can do such a thing, eradicate some of the match fixing stuff? Is it switching more around towards education? Because obviously education was one of the big recommendations.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that down to sport to educate its members, or someone like GLMS? Giancarlo, have you been doing anything on?
Yeah, exactly. I was about to intervene here. So basically, we mentioned cooperation. I think there is never enough cooperation, and this is something that we discussed with David. And more importantly, education and prevention also very, very important. I mean, we tend to sanction a lot, and this is normal. I mean, very important to sanction. We do work as well with Europol, with Interpol. But in my humble opinion, sanctioning is the end of the process. And from a sport perspective, sanctioning means also failure at the end of the day. It's a weakness. And what we should all do is really to invest in the beginning of the process, is educating the players, the entourage, the parents. At GLMS, we are also now working with the police through some Erasmus Plus project in taking sports. So we go and we try to train officers locally, and this is very important. And for me, this is the future of the fight against match fixing, is really educating and doing some prevention instead of just into bracket sanctioning.
And Jonny, how does that fit into your remit as well?
Well, it's a very significant part of my remit, and the old adage that prevention is better than cure is really important here. Tennis has invested significantly in the education program, both in terms of the online mandatory training that all covered persons now must complete in order to be part of the professional game, through to my education and training team who regularly visit large tournaments and brief players and other persons, as well as doing a lot of online training. During the hiatus, we trained over 1,500 players and other covered persons in helping them understand how to manage the challenge of making ends meet, to be frank, during the hiatus, and what to do about corrupt approaches and so on. So a lot of investment in training. There are other things we need to do to remove some of the temptation and causes of corruption in tennis. From a prevention point of view, some of that's around the structure of the sport and how money flows in the sport, and obviously those issues somewhat delayed due to COVID at the moment, but on the agenda. I would say the other challenge for us is that as spot fixing becomes more subtle, whether our data is able to detect spot fixing at its most subtle. And I think that's something I'm very interested in really understanding how we can look at performance-related data, betting-related data, correlation of the two, and just stay ahead of the game on this. As I think people know from the recent Europol report, organised crime have got their tentacles into my sport and other sports, and they're sophisticated. So we've got a challenge to keep ahead of that, and I think data is a key part of that.
Well, if it's something about data, and obviously, David, that brings you into play. I mean, I'm assuming that's something you've been looking at very closely. Oh, we've lost you, David.
Here we go. Is that better? Can you hear me now? So,
yep.
Yeah, fully agree. And I think one of the key aspects of our responses to the IRP again was that actually the sport needs to harness technology, to combat the many challenges that corrupt actors present in the way in which they try and infiltrate and/or kind of corrupt the betting market on a particular sport. Certainly something we advocate for, through our through our monitoring system, the fraud detection system. We obviously have been monitoring ITF tennis since, with that full kind of coverage of the monitoring system since 2018. Through the COVID period, we monitored over 6,500 tennis matches, to ensure that actually through a period where actually we certainly perceived that there was a heightened risk, as Jonny alluded to, that the coverage that we were delivering was as tightly controlled as possible. I think Jonny's right. There are many different ways in which those risks can manifest itself. One of the things that we've pioneered at Sportradar is the use of account level information and access to account level information that we have through our own systems and through our own managed trading services, to have visibility on those more specific forms of fixing. And I agree with Jonny, that's certainly something we've seen an increase in terms of that type of fixing, as opposed to historically more fixing on match related or set related outcomes. So I think all of those challenges are present. As I said, I think we've got to harness technology, the work that we've done. And by the way, I think the TIU or the ITIA has to do the same. The monitoring that we've done and we've had in place since 2018 with the ITF has seen, between 2018 and 2019, there was a 48% decrease in kind of suspicious betting alerts across ITF tennis. And I'm not saying that was purely because of the work that we did on monitoring. I think there were a number of factors in there, but it's certainly one of those key areas. And I think the other area that we've again pioneered in tennis and now bringing to other sports is a risk-based approach, a targeted risk-based approach to the way in which kind of data and events are offered to the betting market. So rather than what I always refer to as the baby and bathwater approach of a prohibition across a layer of the sport, actually, look at the risk factors that determine, individuals, locations, whatever those factors may be, in identifying key risk areas, and then adjust your offer accordingly. And that's something that, as I said, we've been doing again for the last year and a half. And we've seen the benefits of that. We've seen the benefits in identifying problems and targeting and removing those problems from the sport, which I think again is to everyone's benefit. And I'd love to see that adopted, on a wider base for sure, not only in tennis but in other sports.
Giancarlo, have you anything to add on that?
No, basically, I think everything was said. On our side, what we did this year was to invest a bit on our operations, and we opened up a new hub in Canada, and this was very important. We are able to offer our service, and now with this new status, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we have now this new status adopted last month by the general meeting. We are now able to welcome new members, a new category of members, and this is very important, like regulators, like the authorities. And the more we are in this fight, better. So we are now working towards improving our services and improving basically increasing our community. And I'm sure, like Sportradar just mentioned, it will be even better in the next couple of months or so. But all together.
You mentioned before on the sanction side of things, and we've gone from one end talking about education, and there's the other end to prosecution. You've mentioned Interpol a bit. How easy is it to get, in some countries, local law enforcement involved? I'm assuming it's actually because you're talking about organised crime. That's a bit. I don't want to use the term sexy to the police to sort out. But just how engaged are the authorities, sort of outside of sport, outside of betting? Is there still more to be done there?
Well, first of all, I only have jurisdiction over covered persons in the sport, so players, coaches, officials, and other designated people. So Anybody outside of that, be they part of an organised crime ring or just corruptors outside the sport, I don't have jurisdiction over. And back to the prevention is better than cure piece, it's in our interest to remove the corruptors as much as we possibly can, because in many cases, the players are victims. I don't want to overstate that. They've crossed the line, and we've zero tolerance for that. But there's no question that some of them are groomed, if you like, into being put in a position where they alter the outcome of a game. So we want to remove the corruptors, or at least deflect them off into other activities, and we need the cooperation of law enforcement agencies in that respect. I would say that, both having looked at this from my previous role and then now in this role, that is getting better, but there is a long way to go. And there's no doubt it varies enormously from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I look at some of the things that are happening in places like Australia, with the setting up of a national agency in this respect, and really positive things. But that is far from universal. And of course, many of these corruptors, actors are in Central and Eastern Europe and other places of that nature where the mechanisms to deal with them locally are just not in place. So hence Europol, Interpol, and others have a key role to play here. And I think the McCarron Convention, signed a couple of years ago, providing a framework for this is a step in the right direction. But we would certainly, and I think all sports would say the same thing, we can't get enough of this. And also having the industry itself, and I think Giancarlo will probably talk to this in a minute, advocating as well that they want help from being defrauded by organised crime and so on. I think we all need to be making our voices heard.
Ms. Giancarlo, what's GLMS's relationship with the different law enforcement agencies been like? Are they more likely to listen to the sports than the betting industry themselves, or are they just as open ear, depending on the jurisdiction, I guess?
No, of course. I mean, we work very closely with the law enforcement, Europol. We have an MOU with them in Interpol as well. We are really in daily contact with them. But of course, I mean, when it comes to match fixing and with our members, which are more local, it has to go through somehow the local police as well. So if something here in Switzerland, I cannot go directly to Interpol or to Europol. I would like to, I would need to go to Interpol first, and then there is this kind of relationship between the local police and Europol and Interpol. But it's working quite well. Sometimes it may seem a bit, like a slow process. It's going well, but we are at the beginning of the process. And as Jonny mentioned before, McCarron Convention. I mean, the more countries sign this convention, better. And I really encourage all the countries to sign it, and so that we can start working like a very professional. Probably the next step. Again, we need to be much more and more members, more actors to fight against match fixing. But when it comes to the law enforcement, I think they are doing a good job, and we work very closely with them. And I know they have a good partnership as well with the IOC, for instance, and they do their very best.
Okay, interesting. And I mean, Jonny, obviously part of your remit is also the sanctioning of players. I mean, you've just done first ban for courtsiding to a player. I mean, why is that an important sanction? Why is courtsiding on your radar, so to speak?
Yeah, so yes, indeed, our first sanction against the player for being involved in courtsiding. I would just be clear. What I'm talking about here is getting people who watch a match to bet ahead of the the data, if you like, to bet on an event that has already occurred. And either they're taking advantage of delays and latency and something that Sportradar can talk a lot about, or they have potentially corrupted the person doing data entry, who's often the umpire, into just slowing down that data entry. So they have that split-second advantage to be able to place a bet, as I say, on an outcome that's already occurred. Really important for us. This is a really big area of concern. It corrupts the sport. It draws in players and others, officials into it, and we absolutely want to stamp it out. So we're very pleased that we've got our first official sanction. We have other cases in the works, and the sport is looking sport-wide at how we can bear down on this phenomenon.
I mean, with regards to latency, David, I mean, it's obviously something that you're constantly working on. I'm assuming just to get that delay out. So that's another way of shutting the door on these people looking to get an unfair advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Fully agree with that. I think the key factor in kind of the court siding, as Jonny said, is actually the losers in a court siding case are generally the bookmakers. So it is a different category because often or in most cases, in fact, it's not necessarily corrupting the outcome of the match. Like the match, can be played out absolutely fairly. It's not a question of an integrity risk or an integrity subversion of the event itself or manipulation of the event itself. It's a mechanism by which the betting markets are taken advantage of, and as Jonny said, often with or sometimes with the participation of his participants, so or his kind of designated individuals, whether that's players or umpires, etc. And so, of course, a concern for us and a concern for our customers is why we invest so much in the infrastructure around data collection, from the umpire's chair, both in terms of latency, but also in terms of monitoring all sorts of things from an audio feed to ensure that there's a synchronicity between the score being entered and the score being announced on court. So all of these kind of technological measures that can be applied to safeguard against this sort of manipulation. Of course, it still happens, not at numerous levels of the game. And it's important, as Jonny said, it's important that appropriate action is taken to deter people from, thinking that there's an opportunity there, or it's an opportunity that they should take advantage of. I think, it's in many ways similar to the kind of the match fixing side, though. The reality is there's a commercial advantage or a financial advantage to be made, and that's ultimately what attracts corrupt activity. That's the reality. We're engaged in an economic activity that has a financial value to it, and so corrupt actors are drawn to it one way or another, and it's up to us, as well as organisations like Giancarlo's and Jonny's to put together the most effective and efficient mechanisms to make it as difficult as possible for those corrupt actors to be successful.
Yeah, and especially David, especially in this COVID situation now. I mean, we are, I don't know you guys, but I guess exactly the same thing. But what we have been noticing over the last 8 months is an increase of the risk of match fixing. With the senior organization being much more active than before, and the sports sector, the athletes, the tennis players as well. I mean, they have hit hard, and the sport is much more vulnerable now. And the issue is that we are now in the middle of the second. We don't know how long this lasts. Well, I don't know, you, Jonny and David, how you are now prepared to go through this question I have for you guys.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Giancarlo. The kind of the susceptibility, the vulnerability has certainly been heightened. On our own data, actually, we've seen an increase in the kind of the susceptibility in tennis of the proliferation of suspicious activity, even with a reduced calendar effectively. And I think, we see that, to go back to maybe where we started the discussion, we see that actually as one of the risks of, we've almost seen in microcosm the risk of creating a kind of a grey market for the sport outside of the organised tours and outside of the organised and official data markets for the sport. And it's one of the things that we were particularly conscious of and, kind of raised our concerns about with moving too swiftly towards removing the lower levels of tennis, because there is an established market on those lower levels of tennis. And if you suddenly remove that, that doesn't mean that the demand for betting will go somewhere else. Actually, we've seen that, alternative sources of tennis can spring up pretty rapidly. They've been almost given the opportunity to have some infrastructure over the last 6 months to be able to do that. And they are simply not subject to the same controls that are applied to the official data setups that come through the tours, and all of the contractual controls and all of the integrity oversight that Jonny's team puts in place. So I think it is a really important point. I think it's a really important point for us to continue to work with Jonny's team in making sure that the transition of the 15K tournaments is handled in a really responsible way, and that we don't create unintended consequences or risk down the line.
Oh, It's a 2-minute bell. We've just got a question here from the audience. Can panelists comment on the different paths followed by the criminal and sports laws, and how this can impact the process of enforcing sanctions against players and sport stakeholders effectively? So, Jonny, the difference between criminal law and sport law. I'm assuming you have to be quite forensic before you lay any sanctions down in the first place, anyway.
Yes, apologies if you hear my dog in the background, but somebody ran the doorbell. Yes, so as I mentioned earlier on, we have, so under sort of the codes of the tennis anti-corruption program, we have jurisdiction over what are called covered persons, so players, officials, coaches, and the like. Outside of that, people are governed by whatever national laws are in place in the jurisdiction. And I think, our challenge here, we've talked about earlier on the call, is, that both the laws vary enormously from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but also the ability and the desire of law enforcement agencies to get involved varies significantly. And it's complicated because David really talked about it much earlier in this call. Tennis really, more than perhaps any other sport, is truly global in the sense that players are moving around the world, playing in one place 1 week, another place the next week. So the crime, if you like, might be committed in country X by a corrupter from country Y, corrupting a player from country A, who's now in country B. And it's very challenging for national law enforcement agencies to deal with that. And when put against perhaps other crimes, Giancarlo mentioned, this can fall down the list of important things to get done. So, I come around, I suppose, the point we made earlier on. There's a lot more progress we need in that space in particular.
Okay, and then sorry, go on, Giancarlo.
If I may, sir, just to intervene, as my colleague Cassandra Fernandez, who is a sport lawyer, would say, sport is disciplinary, while criminal is legislation. So both need to work together at a local level, and one cannot go without the other. So this is why it's very complicated to deal with these issues. But definitely, there is a need of more and more cooperation between the law enforcement, the local jurisdiction, as you mentioned before, Jonny, and the sports sector, definitely.
Cool. And just to wrap things up, obviously this year has been a bit of a horror show, and we talked about some of the effects that COVID's had on both the sport and the betting markets. But have we learned anything this year that is very useful in the battle against corruption going forward. Is there anything we've learned from how we've had to change our processes that's it's going to be useful, hopefully 2021 and forward? David?
Yeah, I certainly think so. And maybe to again recap on a couple of things that I've referenced in the course of the last half hour, but I think what it's given, at least from a Sportradar perspective, I think what it's given us and I think Jonny as well, and not just, this goes beyond tennis, but if we keep it to tennis, it's given us a view on what a far less well controlled, managed and authorized market could look like, and the many challenges of trying to handle integrity risk in those circumstances. And I think we had to react very quickly to, as I said, to put in place monitoring systems across 6,500 matches that fell outside of our kind of the usual scope of our monitoring setup within tennis with the ITF and others. And that was an incredibly important step. Equally, working with some of Jonny's colleagues in the TIU to ensure that appropriate contractual mechanisms were put in place very quickly for the players and participants in the events that we as Sportradar were investing in and bringing to the market. But we know that was not happening in numerous other events that were being offered into the betting market around the world. And so I think those significant challenges, as I said, it gave us a real window on, I guess, on an alternative future or an alternative part of the market. That, as I said, I think we've always seen the risk that if you don't get the authorized part of the market made properly and created in a balanced way that serves the downstream demand for betting on tennis, and it is clearly a significant betting sport. It's super popular. It is, it drives great value for the sport actually to be reinvested into it. So it's, but that has to be done responsibly. And as I said, I think we perhaps got a glimpse of some of those challenges. And to us, I think that's also, serves as a really important lesson in terms of how we then manage ensuring that kind of that balanced approach and that balanced schedule of events is maintained through the various changes that Jonny's going to be continuing to implement over the coming years.
How about you, Giancarlo?
Well, David was very clear, but what I would add is basically, yes, the balance is very important between, this McCarron Convention, the cooperation between the members, the partners, being involved since the very beginning of the process, as we are now with TIU, and exchange on a global level. Also work more with sport. This is something that I'm, as a sportsman, I keep telling my players at the Swiss level, basketball, they don't even know that they cannot bet on their own game. The staff member of the Swiss Basketball Federation, they don't even know that the national state lottery, you can bet on any online as well for basketball, Swiss basketball. So communication is very important. Communicate more, and even more than now, and have this beautiful story as well. I mean, during this year, my thought was at the beginning, okay, less competition, lower risk. And it was exactly the opposite that happened this year. And with these ghost games, and I know, you know what I'm talking about. And basically, we need to be ready when there is no competition. There is still room for the fraudsters and the fixers. And I remember the story. We stopped completely the basketball league at the European level. The NBA was not playing anymore. And all of a sudden, we see some new competition, coming up and being played in different countries. And this was impossible, So it's even worse when there are no competition and there are ghost games being played, because you can fix the game as you want. So we have to be careful, with the second wave. If we start stopping again and this competition, we have to be ready.
And just finish off, Jonny. Obviously, you came in at right in the middle of the pandemic. What have you managed to learn from that short period of time?
Well, just before Andy, I did actually manage to get out to an ITF tournament in Crete just before the lockdown. So very, very lucky to have done that. I agree with everything that Giancarlo and David have said. I mean, I think we've learned a lot about what the unregulated market could look like and the challenge that might present. And I agree with all those comments. I think the other thing, just looking at it, and it's sort of related to that, I suppose, is that just this realization that prevention is better than cure. And I think that TRU has perhaps been in the past a sort of quasi-police force, investigating and punishing. And I think we see that, treating the symptoms is, you clearly have to do that, but actually curing the disease is the bigger challenge and the more interesting challenge. And I think over the coming years, as David said, we collectively in the sport and with our partners in the sport need to continue to look at how we can remove the incentives, how can we remove the vulnerabilities, and try to, as I say, clean up that aspect of it. And that's some of the shift that's going to go on with the establishment of the International Tennis Integrity Agency, from January, and some of the resources we're going to be putting in around that will be, a manifestation of tennis's commitment to remove, if you like, and prevent corruption in the sport.
Fantastic. I mean, the key phrase there was curing the disease, which obviously we can carry through to all walks of life nowadays. But gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a fascinating discussion. I hope everyone in the audience has enjoyed it. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Thanks, Andrew.